Ladies and gentlemen, friends and fellow travelers, welcome to this panel today. I'd like to thank our speakers. I'm very excited. We have Angela Bullock, Rodney Graham, Ragnar Kjartansson, Ari Benjamin Myers, and Jim Shaw with us today to talk about this whole idea of art and music. They all are or have been, besides their very distinguished art practice, also members of bands. And we're going to discuss this. And obviously, we'll, as always with these panels, then open it to the floor. This is a continuation of a series of panels which started about 3 years ago, where we explore sort of parallel realities, as David Deutsch would say. The artist as an urbanist, the artist as an architect were at the beginning of these panels, and many more. And I must thank the late Greek composer Xenakis, because today's panel would not have happened without him, because when I was a student I went to see him as a kind of a pilgrimage in Paris, and Xenakis somehow was telling me a lot about this whole idea of his desire as a composer to really enter the world of exhibition. And we had a whole conversation about this whole idea if one can actually exhibit music. He was also saying that he thinks it's so interesting that historically in avant-garde art there has been throughout the 20th century so many artists who either wrote scores or have developed in a very experimental way with music. And he was also somehow saying that obviously in big parts this sort of intersection for his generation kind of remained unrealized. And I think it's so exciting that in the current moment there's many more of these interjections kind of happening. So I'd like to dedicate today's panel to kind of Xenakis' unrealized dream of making that happen, and also to his polytops, which were these extraordinary kind of musical installations he wanted to do, where he wanted to sort of, within exhibition spaces in museum, have these kind of multiple sound kind of elements to be experienced. And obviously that will be something we're going to address, besides the very important aspect of our participants, bands. We're going to also talk about this idea, can one actually exhibit music? How can it enter exhibitions? And last but not least, of course, as always, the dimension of the unrealized project will be very important. We're going to discuss, if there are maybe unrealized projects in relation to art and music our participants today have. I'd like to actually start by welcoming our first speaker, Angela Bullock, who, born in Canada, studied at Goldsmith College in London, where we met for the first time in the late 80s. Her recent exhibitions actually include an exhibition entitled Sharp Big Drama at Witte de With, Rotterdam in 2012, and a survey show also in Wolfsburg 2011, as well as another survey show in Berlin in 2011 called Information Manifesto. And Angela told me yesterday that the band is kind of put on hold. So maybe a first question, Angela, I wanted to ask you is how it all started with the band, and if you can tell us a little bit about your band and what's the current state of it in terms of it being on hold.
The band was called Big Bottom. It's a 5 bass guitar ensemble, and we had a machine for the drums. And we did a number of different kind of performances, mostly in conjunction with a choreographer, Michael Clark. So we went on tour, and the music we made was used as the score for like some of the choreography that he did. It started, I guess, Susan Stenger was the person who formed the band. And she had worked a lot with John Cage, and so she felt that it was interesting to ask some people who were not actually musicians, who were not trained musicians. So because of like a Cage kind of idea, she invited me and Tom Gidley and Kerry Thwin Evans, also Sarah Lucas, but Sarah never actually played, but she was invited in the beginning. So we did quite a number of tours and things, but we haven't really performed since the last time we performed was we opened for Throbbing Gristle at the Volksbühne on New Year's Eve, like about 6 years ago, and that seemed to be like the pinnacle. That was such a great way to sort of go out. So we kind of haven't tried to do it again since then, because that was kind of a mighty event.
And for you as an artist to be this panel, I was kind of wondering who were your kind of main influences or heroes in music?
Cage. I mean, that's a simple answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you also told me actually last night that now that the band is on hold, you actually have your own label, that's sort of the new connection to music and has been a new release.
As an artist, I've over the last 20 years, I've worked a lot with music or musicians and composition within my works, like installations. I've worked with different kinds of people. So I finally decided this year, at the beginning of the year, to start my own record label in order to release some of the music that I've made specifically for, artworks, installations and stuff. So that's what the label is doing. And and now I'm working on a project that's going to be just a live event at the theatre in Paris at the Pompidou next year, towards the end of March. But working with David Grubbs, a small musical ensemble. I think I'll be performing as well myself, but also just working on a structural level with the music and a visual for theatre piece. So.
And very recently there is also in 2012 the ABCD LP, The Sharp Big Drama, which is written and composed by George Van Damme. Can you tell us about this?
Well, that's a piece of music that was made specifically to drive a drawing machine. I made drawing machines, and so I thought that would be, there's one of the drawing machines here at the fair, actually, but it's a machine that draws onto the wall directly according to the sound that's given to it. So this music was made specifically for this machine. And so the composer, he's really a violin player, and he composes with violin. And so the music that it's made, it's really kind of, it turns the machine into the musical instrument. It's driven by the score. So it's kind of, the music turns into a drawing. So it's like that. Yeah.
And obviously that leads us also to the Xenakis kind of thing, when he said maybe exhibitions should have soundtracks or artworks should have soundtracks. That was I remember this piece you did at Tape Britain a couple of years ago. That was a collaboration with Hecco. Can you maybe tell us about this? Because that's another good example for that.
Well, that installation was called The Disenchanted Forest times 1001, and it used a lot of quite sophisticated technology delivery sound systems between the floor and the ceiling. And so, the whole thing was a great big tangled piece of string. It was a kind of, it was a reference to a piece by Duchamp, like 1 mile of string, but it was actually a kilometer. Well, anyway, it's more complicated than that, but I made like 10 different sound showers within the installation. So there were 10 separately kind of controlled sound showers within a kind of given area that was full of string. Just heard of, well, I could...
And do you have any unrealized projects in relation to such?
Well, yes,
musical...
it's all of the future is like that. Yeah, it's not one, but it's not just one song, like Neil Young would say.
And Neil Young leads us to the conversation we had before, because Rodney, you're just reading his biography, I think, and that is the moment to, autobiography. And that's the moment to actually introduce Rodney Graham, who very much also was at the origin of this panel, because we recorded an interview a couple of years ago, and doing these interviews very often, it's kind of fascinating to do them in unusual locations. So this idea came up that we would do the interview at the hairdresser. So we did an interview with Rodney at the hairdresser, and Alexandra Zouari, and it was actually documented by Andri Sala, this performance. And at that time we talked a lot about this idea, Rodney, of you doing this pioneering work with sound and with music. And I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about, because it's something which appears so much in all of your exhibitions. And I mean, the list of exhibitions is so long that it would be a marathon to actually read them all. I can just say maybe most recently there have been survey shows at the Contemporary Art Museum in Barcelona or at the Jeu de Paume. And in all of these shows, music kind of enters, but I was wondering where it all started, if there was a kind of a trigger or an epiphany where music entered the work.
Well, I always played music when I was younger, played in bands, and like rock music, pop music, but usually just as a rhythm guitar player in other people's bands and things like that. And then but I kind of dropped when I started pursuing my art career, because I really just couldn't afford the time, and also I couldn't afford even the equipment at the time, and I always wanted to spend more time doing music, but I kind of left it through all of the 80s and didn't really do anything. It's the odd project with a friend, but and then I guess the first instance of use of music in my work would be this work Parsifal that I did in the 90s, which was a manipulation of some bars of Wagner's opera to extend it into turn it into take this already quite long opera and make it almost infinitely long by using kind of interlocking loops of asynchronous loops using prime numbers of bars, prime numbers, so that that was kind of inhabiting a composer's persona, I guess, which is something that I kind of started doing a little bit later, doing this thing with personas. It was a kind of ironic inhabiting of a composer's persona. Actually, this thing was based on, the Parsifal piece was based on some already additional bars that were done by Engelbert Humperdinck, who was Wagner's assistant on the project, a composer in his own right. In any case, so there's this highly mediated relationship to musical authorship. And it was a kind of ironic kind of intervention that I made. I've kind of done some things like that with so-called serious music, intervening in that kind of, but I always wanted to do something to get back to playing pop music and somehow integrate it in my work. And I guess I did the first time where I a video film that I made called How I Became a Ramblin' Man, which is based on a kind of a scene you'd see in a Gene Autry film of the 30s, when he kind of rides into a location on his horse and then gets off and sings a song, a kind of musical interlude. In this case, I shot a video of myself riding in this kind of desert landscape, getting off, sitting on a log, and singing the song called How I Became a Rambling Man, which is a song that I wrote. That's the first time I used pop music in my work, and then I managed to do it in another work called The Phonokinetoscope, which is done a few years after that in Berlin, actually, where I took LSD in the park and rode around in a Tiergarten and rode around on a bicycle, and I made a film soundtrack for that. That's a song I recorded with my band, a kind of a little bit of an homage to Syd Barrett, a kind of long psychedelic jam, and it was a 60 millimeter film projection that was activated by engaging the turntable, like the viewer would put the stylus on the turntable would start the projector, and then the film would start wherever it happened to be after the last person left it. So it's about, again, using this kind of ideas of asynchrony, playing on the idea of a music video and what's like kind of anything looks good when there's I mean, the sound and music, I think it tends to always be interesting. So no matter what point you start. So it was kind of a little bit of a investigation of like that, this kind of asynchrony, like an asynchronous music video, let's say. But I've tried subsequently to kind of integrate the music, which I've got more and more into. When I started kind of recording my first pop album in the late 90s, I guess, I was exploring different genres a little bit. And then I eventually settled into kind of a conventional singer-songwriter mode. I realized that's kind of what I like to do. So I was always engaging this idea of authenticity, which is something when you're writing songs, basically you're playing an acoustic guitar or with the band. There's this kind of, you're trying to find this voice that's somehow authentic. And that made it kind of in a way get harder and harder and harder, because I was trying to do something that was like sort of without an irony, without kind of assuming a persona. And subsequently, that led to kind of my current situation, which is a kind of quite intense writer's block. I haven't been able to write lyrics for like 5 years. I sit every day, I spend an hour, at least an hour, trying to write a song. And the riffs are there, the music's there, but the lyrics, I can't do it. It's just like, but I find that I'm quite productive artistically, so in terms of the art. So there's a real disjunction between the two things for me. I have a bit of a problem. So I'm still waiting. That's why the Neil Young book is interesting, because he's writing the book because he gave up smoking marijuana, gave up drinking, two things that he needed to do to kind of write songs. And then he started writing this book as a way of kind of like just dealing with the time. And the words started kind of flowing out of him. So he started discovering himself as a writer. And he's just talking a lot about, I can't wait for Crazy Horse to come back so we can jam, and maybe I can write some songs, maybe I can't, whatever. But I thought that's kind of interesting. I find it when I'm quite productive artistically, the music doesn't come. So anyway, I've had a problem putting them together, and I still, and also sometimes I find playing the kind of music I play doesn't sound very good in museum and gallery context because the acoustics are different. It just sounds better in a club or also it's nice to play to people who are a little bit drunk, I have to say, Anyway.
No, then that leads us to something we're going to discuss later, because Ari has been saying for a long time, rather than actually doing it in a museum, we should do this kind of marathon idea of actually having a sort of a non-stop kind of, musical kind of performances artist. But I had a kind of a memory moment before when you mentioned the LSD, connection, because these whole Art Basel conversations and Art Basel Miami conversations actually started with the late Albert Hoffman, because one of the very first kind of public conversations is when we did this interview, and I had interviewed Albert Hoffman, and he was almost 100 years old, and it was very funny because he looked much, much younger, so he said, you absolutely have to tell the audience that I'm 100 years old, because otherwise they're going to think I'm 80 and I'm poorly performing. It's kind of great, but it brings us to another topic. I want to bring you back to your band, because there is obviously the Rodney Graham band, which appears regularly in the art world, and when you do these performances, you do them very often in front of these amazing rotary psycho opticon, which is an extraordinary object. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the band, what led to the band, and then these performances with this very wonderful object.
Well, the band kind of evolved out of the people, the core members of the band are two friends of mine that I've known for a long time in the music world of Vancouver, and they're recording engineers and record producers as well. So I started working with them in a recording context, and then we started performing together, John Collins and Dave Carswell, and then we brought in Pete Bourne as a drummer. So that's kind of the core group, is kind of my Crazy Horse, and I've been playing with them for years, and we're like, but they're kind of not. They're not artists. They're musicians, and sometimes I find it harder and harder to convene the band because they tour with other Vancouver groups. They're touring with this band Destroyer now, who they produced as well, and it's kind of a core group. I don't really collaborate. I haven't really collaborated with anybody else. I really work with these core people, and I kind of like that. There's a kind of camaraderie and a kind of a long-term relationship. We've been playing together for 15 years maybe, so I kind of enjoy that. It's a little different than. Although I have to say, in my art making is similarly collaborative. When I'm making like a large photograph or a film, I enjoy working with a crew, So band is kind of like that. And the Rotary Psycho-Opticon is just something that I made for a performance in New York and in Glasgow. It's just it's based on a prop that I saw on a Belgian television show in the 70s, and Black Sabbath was performing War Pigs, I think, and there's this kind of circular kind of psychedelic structure with five circles, and they kind of rotate, and then they have this kind of psychedelic pattern on them, and it kind of rotates. And I kind of thought it was so low tech, it's just in black and white, and I thought there must be like a technician behind there just like literally cranking this thing. It wasn't like it was so unsophisticated. So I made a kind of copy of it, this rotating structure that's powered by by cyclists who during the performances just riding a bicycle, pedaling very slowly to kind of activate this thing, and so I used that but it was, and I put it in all these road cases and sort of traveled it with the band, but it became a little expensive to kind of move it. So We got that.
Thank you so much. And this idea of the band leads us to our next speaker, to Ragnar Kjartansson, who also has a band. And it's actually interesting. When I visited Iceland for the first time, I was told that literally everybody in Iceland at some point is in a band. So Ragnar, I wanted to ask you how it all started with your band, if there was a kind of a musical epiphany.
Yeah, it was. I think I was always in a band, and then I went to art school because that's kind of the European way to become a great rock and roller, to go to art school. and then I formed the first band with my friends, and we've had various names of this band. There was one's called Canada, one's called The Funerals, and one band called Trabant. And now it's hardly a band anymore. It's just like a group of friends who just use music as an excuse to spend time together. So
that's the current situation. It's the Ragnar Kjartansson and the All-Star Band.
Yeah, we had a deal that we always, if the person that gets the gig can call the band, his name or her name and the All-Star Band. So like when I book the gig, it's Ragnar Kjartansson and the All-Star Band. Yeah.
Now to come back to the Xenaki thing, when he said, how can we bring music into exhibition?
Yeah.
That's obviously something which plays a big role for you. Your show actually, I think for the ICA in Boston is called Song, and that's going to tour then to the Carnegie. The exhibition you have at the moment at the Migros Museum for Gegenwartskunst has also to do with music. So does actually your project you did for Performer in New York, Bliss, and so did obviously also your 2009 Venice Biennale Pavilion, The End. So I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit how it started that you then brought this musical practice into your shows.
Yeah, it used to be, at first it was, art and music, and you do your art, and then I was do your art during the day, and then in the evening you go to band rehearsal. But slowly, I discovered that it was much more comfortable to work with music in the art context, rather than try to make an album, because it's like such a limited, the form of pop music is such a limited form. It's basically an album and concerts. But if you call it like art world pop, then you can do kind of whatever you want to, like create films or do installations with it, or so it ended up like that the whole musical thing just went into the art, and also somehow it felt more authentic, because when I was making music as music, I always felt I was kind of pretending to do a song. It's like, but then when it became an art piece, it was like so pretentious that it just went full circle and became authentic. So yeah. So that's, I think, it just came from this. This is like this longing for honesty and try to be a little authentic. Yeah. That's why the music ended as art.
And what about sort of different temporalities? Because you obviously go far beyond this temporality of a concert. You very often look for kind of marathon formats and extremely long durational things. How did that start? It's
just started from just having a course in art school about like Marina Abramovic and Chris Burton and all that stuff, and then just going, wow, yeah, it would be nice to make concerts that are like this, and very kind of basic idea, just like, and also but then I discovered that also like the durational thing is more comfortable than a concert, because when you do a concert you just have to like really deliver in 40 minutes, but when it's like for 12 hours you just can just sink into it, and you don't have to care about the audience as much. They just pass by, and it's art, and it's all right.
That was Bliss, and that was a 12-hour kind of live loop of the Marriage of Figaro. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, that was a piece I created for Performa 11, and and I always, because it also comes from my background, I'm raised in the theater. I was always fascinated by the durational thing and the loop thing of the theater. It's like when you're always kept as a child in the dark, and during rehearsals they're always doing the same thing over and over again, and has this kind of magical quality that when there's no narrative. And so therefore I wanted to create a piece that was musical and theatrical and kind of operatic. So then I choose this part from The Marriage of Figaro, where it's the final aria where everybody is asking for forgiveness, and like the count comes and says, "Countess, please forgive me," and then the countess says, "I forgive you because I'm better than you." and I just find this part of music so crazy, beautiful, and profound, because it's like Mozart decides to write, like the whole opera is very rococo, and then in this part it almost becomes like nostalgic, because we always turn a bit nostalgic when we were searching for feeling, for emotion, beauty, and I find it fascinating that in this part Mozart decides to like kind of sound like Monteverdi, to make everybody cry when everybody's asking for forgiveness. So, and then the part I really love is that nobody is really forgiving anybody, nobody's really asking for forgiveness. It's like so humanistic. So that's why this part has always been very important to me, because it's a great mantra about the human state of mind. So therefore we created this thing with like a 14-piece like sinfonietta, and 11 singers on stage and costumes and everything. Just this part of the Marriage of Figaro for 12 hours, and it was just fantastic to do it. And it was like almost like a bit of a humanistic religious experience, because it was like the main singer. I really liked what he said when I asked him to do it. He's Iceland's greatest opera singer. It's like sang at La Scala and Metropolitan, and I asked him to do it, and he was just called me the day later. Yeah, I'll do it, because singing Mozart for 12 hours it's easy. It's just like sleeping, because it's so beautiful. So it was.
And the last question maybe is, we mentioned before the Migros, and that's another piece where you bring music into the world of exhibition. It's a kind of a piece, it's called An die Musik, to music, which sort of relates to Schubert's song. Can you tell us about this more recent endeavor?
Yeah, that was a piece which is just, it's kind of, it was like a kind of Stockhausen-esque approach to a very kind of simple classical lieder song, which is so powerful, An die Musik, because it is. I love that song because it's the 19th century approach to art, where like art is holy, holde, it's holy, priceless, and it's kind of a very. It's in our contemporary situation in the art world, where we're like still like suffering after a few anti-Warhol jokes. We can't get over it, and to have this lyric and to hold the Kunst, it's like you priceless art in all these gray moments when you kind of save me from suicide. It's just art. Thank you, art. And I actually first did it here at the MoCA, the first edition of it. Then I did it with then I performed the song with dancers with feathers and everything, Miami style. And then I did it in Migros Museum in Zurich with 11 opera singers and 11 piano players. So they just filled up a space, and it was just cacophony and just noise. Like it was very kind of crazy noise created out of this beautiful song. So Yeah.
But it's good also you mentioned Stockhausen. I'm very glad you mentioned Stockhausen because he, besides Xenakis, was the second kind of trigger for this panel, because I went to see him also about 10 years ago near Cologne in his house, and there again the whole conversation turned around this idea of, you know, the unrealized idea of actually bringing sound and music into the sort of environment of exhibitions. And one of the amazing things about that Stockhausen visit was that search for oxygen, because the driver picked me up and, you know, I asked her how it is to work for Mr. Stockhausen, and she said that it's very peculiar because he would always have all the windows open in the car. He needed oxygen. It would be very strange in winter when it's -5 degrees and stuff. And then, like, we arrived at the house and started the interview, and he would permanently open and close windows. It was kind of like, you know, if Isa Gensky would say more light research, it's kind of a more oxygen research.
Wow.
And that obviously leads us directly to Ari Benjamin Myers from Stockhausen.
Oxygen.
To, not the oxygen, but the idea of, as a composer, you know, bringing music and sound into exhibitions, because Ari, who lives in Berlin, is trained as a composer and conductor and works mostly with the medium of music. And we met each other in the context of Tempo del Postino, when Filippo Areno and I, you know, curated this opera in 2007. And it was actually through Tino Segal that we met. And Tino said, you know, you need a director of music. Every opera needs a director of music. So we appointed Ari director of music of this opera, and ever since he has collaborated a lot with artists. He worked a lot with Dominic Gonzalez Förster and a lot with Henri Sala, I think at the moment on Venice, but also on his films, and most recently, of course, the ongoing collaboration also with Tino Segal for the piece in Documenta. However, there are also Ari's solo projects, a project called Solo, or the Symphony X, and he's about to actually go now also in the world of exhibitions more and more by doing gallery shows and museum shows. So Ari, I wanted to ask you how it all started. What was your kind of epiphany to come into music, and who were your kind of heroes or inspirations?
I mean, I guess for me the epiphany was the other way around, because I was always doing music. I mean, my father was a musician, there was a piano in the house, so I had a very classical, you know, the typical thing, like started playing piano when I was 4, and then, you know, then I got bored when I was a bit older, practicing all the time, so I started to compose because I was bored, sort of play. And then I was composing more, and then when you start to compose and you're young, no one wants to play your music, so you have to start to, you know, learn to conduct so you can actually get people together to play your music. So I had this very sort of classical, sort of the classical trifecta, like piano, composing, conducting, and I had met, you know, I was lucky I met Leonard Bernstein, and I worked with him, and he really, it was like quite a big thing for me to meet him and work with him, and I, you know, I came to Germany actually. When I came to Germany 12 or 13 years ago as an opera conductor, so it was really like the most classical thing imaginable, and I'd worked at the Bavarian State Opera, and I guess with opera was always this interest, because opera is still this thing that brings everything together. I mean, that's why, you know, also Il Tempo was so interesting. I mean, opera is still this combination, the original combination of music, stage, visual, sound, performance, dance. You know, opera really is this kind of Gesamtkunstwerk, to use the Wagner term. And but you know, the opera world is very, yeah, how to say, it's a kind of conservative place. You know, they kind of like to do things a certain way. They're very good at doing certain things. Over the last 350 years, they've gotten very good at, but they're not very good at doing other things. And so I was slowly getting more and more interested in doing other things, and I started to find out that these houses, like opera houses or theaters or even concert halls, are very good for a specific thing, but once you try to break that, it all kind of, the whole business, the whole modality of working totally breaks down. And so I had sort of went more and more in a direction of kind of experimental music theater. Actually met Tino because I did a production of this Philip Glass opera, Einstein on the Beach, in 2000. And Tino was the choreographer for that production. That's how we met. It's very funny. So, which is also kind of a marathon of, I mean, there's 6.5 hours of, you know, of, so And then, so I started working more and more like this on kind of experimental productions and music theater productions. I also then was playing in rock bands and things like that. And it was really, as far as the epiphany to move more into an art situation, it was on one hand Tino and our relationship, since he's an old friend and we'd always been talking, and so that was kind of an ongoing conversation. And then really Il Tempo, where we first worked together and where I met so many artists at once, and it was really quite a job actually going between what the different artists and what they want from music or how they think about, because they're all very different artists also, and their approach to music was so different. So it was really like a crash course in like a year of thinking about music in a different way. So that was really how the epiphany came for me, the other way around. Yeah.
And I was curious also to know a little bit more about your technique of productive sabotage, because you've talked about this idea of, for example, in relation to your Symphony X, you've talked about this idea of productive sabotage. And I was wondering if you could talk about this dynamics between creation and destruction.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially in the music field, we're very, specifically in the classical music field where I come from, we're very, very caught up in a kind of, I think, kind of old-fashioned idea of perfection. It's really quite amazing that even today, the main, sort of the number one driving rule is to be perfect, in the opera, which would completely exclude anything like your project or anything that especially with singers, opera singers, it's all about the perfection of the voice. When you're working with an orchestra, it's all about the perfection of the sound. It's all about the concert becoming more and more like the recording, which is a very kind of sort of bit of a perverse thing, because it wasn't always like that. I mean, you can go back, you can read, the reviews, like in the Leipziger Illustrierte Musikzeitung of like the premiere of Beethoven, when Beethoven premiered his 4th, 5th, and 6th symphony in one concert, and there were opera, the concert lasted 7 hours long, and people were hanging out, and concerts really used to be this great kind of circus, and so for me, this whole sort of sabotage thing started in thinking about how could you sort of in an interesting way, I mean, not just in a destructive way, but kind of play against the expectations, that people come to a concert, expect that it'll be one thing, and then maybe try to use the form of the concert itself to break those expectations. I think even as a composer, there was something I liked to do. I always thought it was very interesting to kind of, give an audience, for instance, a kind of, if you give them something beautiful, but then you take it away, I always thought was kind of a very a thing that I like to do. It's maybe a bit cruel, but it's a good way to kind of have an audience, give them, but then sabotage it. So I think, again, where I'm coming from, this idea of sabotage, I think, is very important. I think it's actually quite necessary. I think it would do a tremendous amount of good if concerts could go back to being a much more, if we didn't care so much about the wrong note or about he didn't hit that high note, and just let them be kind of spontaneous performances.
And now, besides your many collaborations with visual artists, there is also your connection to rock music, to techno music as well. I mean, you collaborate with lots of bands. You worked with Einstürzende Neubauten, closely also with the Residents. And you obviously, like Angela, Rodney, and Ragnar, and Jim, you also have your own band, Ceylan. I was wondering if you could talk.
I did. I mean, it's kind of a closed. Yeah, it was. That was funny. That came about as these things sometimes do. I was in Berlin, and I had 2 very good friends who play in 2 different bands, and they were both on tour. And one of them was just sort of stuck in Berlin, as sometimes happens, and the other one, which also sometimes, met a girl in Berlin, and stuck around Berlin, and then fell out of love, and then he was in. So it was this friend of mine, Chris Spencer, who plays in this. It's kind of a legendary New York hardcore band called Unsane, and he's the lead singer and guitarist. And this other friend, Nico Wenner, who plays in a great San Francisco band called Oxbow. And they were there, and they were suddenly sort of bored, and they said, so let's do something. And I thought, yeah, it's a good idea, let's do something. And actually my original idea with Chris, I had this kind of crazy idea that I would write like, almost like Schubert. I had this funny idea to write like Schubert Lieder, but have Chris, because Chris, Unsane is a real hardcore, so his singing is really, that kind of singing, And I thought it'd be great to write these kind of, like art songs and have him sing it and maybe have Nico play guitar. And as we started to work on it, though, I realized that it was kind of, like it would just, I at some point even realized, wow, this is just a kind of artsy, sort of, like, why am I making them do this for my, and I realized, and I had another kind of epiphany, which was that the most radical thing I could do then would be to just say, let's start a band, Like that would actually be, for me to be in a hardcore, because also I'm a keyboard player, and a keyboard player in a rock band is totally lame, totally terrible. So I thought, so we said, let's start a band, and we did, and it was a very clear project. It was like, we made a record, the record was released, we did a small tour opening up for this band called Neurosis. And then we did our own tour, like a Europe tour, which was, like 36 shows and 37 nights, like a real rock and roll on the bus, And after that, for me, it was over. It was, that was a, but now, that was a few years ago, and I said never again. Now they want to re-release Amphetamine Reptile, which is the label from Jello Biafra, from the Dead Kennedys. It's a great label, and they want to re-release the record in the States as a vinyl because it never really came out. And he said, well, but if we do that, then you will have to do a U.S. tour, and you will have to. So maybe, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to go back on the road, but yeah, okay.
And that leads us.
Ragnar says, do it. So.
That leads us to our next speaker, to Jim, who also founded a band, an unbelievably legendary band, together with Mike Kelly, the proto-punk group Destroy All Monsters, which was founded in the 70s, I think 1974, no? And obviously, similar to all our other participants, for Jim, this is a parallel reality, and the main part is his practice as an artist in many, many exhibitions. It would be a marathon in itself to read all his exhibitions here, so I just want to focus on a few recent shows. You should all go to Gateshead at the Baltic Center, where his current survey show takes place right now, the Rin Cycle, through to February 17th. Other survey shows include the CRPC, the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Bordeaux, PS1 MoMA 2007, the Magazin in Grenoble, and so on. But before we talk about that, and before we talk about the way you bring also music into exhibitions, I wanted to ask you to tell us about the band and how Destroy All Monsters happened. What was the epiphany?
Well, I had graduated from undergraduate, and I was a painter, and I realized that being a painter was kind of a dead thing. And it seemed like being in a band would be the thing to do. And in Ann Arbor, there wasn't anybody doing anything like the Stooges anymore. They were from Ann Arbor, but it was all sort of roots rock stuff. So that seemed like a good thing to do. Mike was still in school, and he wanted to be a drummer. He had a distinct interest in drone music. I could have, if I had any talent, maybe gone in the direction of prog rock, but without talent, I was reduced to playing, noise guitar and things like that. And he was friends with Niagara, who had briefly gone to U of M. Her boyfriend was Carrie Lauren at the time. So we just started playing. It sort of evolved into the Niagara stuff occurred separate from the Mike and I stuff, because she just wasn't interested in that stuff. And then after Mike and I went off to graduate school, Carrie had a bit of a breakdown, and he started playing with the Miller brothers, and then they started working with Ron Ashton as a proper rock and roll band. But Destroy All Monsters, before that, we played 3 gigs maximum of which we lasted maybe 15 minutes per gig. You know, people would just leave the room. I think our first song was a cover of Iron Man, and I only knew like one verse of it. But we were sort of more the idea of a band. But even when we reformed later, the stuff that we would record while practicing was always better and more interesting than the stuff we'd do on stage. On stage, we kind of usually felt like we had to produce something of entertainment, which meant practicing and having songs and stage patter and stuff like that. But also we were often mixed in like in All Tomorrow's parties with real bands. And they don't have that much patience for art, you know. So we tried to at least be entertaining in some form or another.
And who were your heroes or inspirations in music when you started?
Well, Sun Ra, and having come out of, like, John Sinclair kind of pushed jazz together with rock and roll back in the 60s in Detroit. And obviously the Stooges, and you know, we were listening to krautrock and the weird end of prog rock, like Arthur Brown's Kingdom Come, and Captain Beefheart,
Yeah.
things like Lumpy Gravy, and yeah.
And what led to the regathering in the 90s? So it was in the mid-90s. You told me in an interview we made in LA last month that in the mid-90s it sort of reformed.
Well, I'm a pack rat, so I had all these tapes in a box, and Mike was working on his survey show at the Whitney, and he was basically in a very bad mood, thought it was going to be the end of his career, and so he retreated to listening to these tapes, and he started working on remastering the tapes, and it ended up becoming this 3-disc set, which anomalously made the Rolling Stone college rock charts, because I think they sold 3 copies of it at the one store that was the source of the chart that month. So then we ended up doing a reunion concert in Detroit, and then we disband once again, and then later on we played a few gigs in Los Angeles. I think that was the last time Niagara played with us, because she just didn't have any interest in the noise aspect. And someone a couple of years later would ask us to perform, and we'd think about what we were going to do. And you know, now we can't perform anymore because Mike's not around. But I've also worked with other people, employees and former employees, doing music.
So there were other bands also?
Well, just an great aggregation of people that I was working with who happened to be musicians, some of them really, really good, much better than myself. Mostly Danny Tull, who's an artist who plays guitar, and he did the soundtracks for my 2 OIST videos. The first one was improvised with a large number of LA art music people forming a sort of a secret society.
And that leads to another question, which is the question Xenakis raised, this idea, how can we actually bring music into exhibitions? It's obviously soundtrack of videos is one possibility. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that? How that sort of whole musical practice entered your
Well, if you have too much music, you know, if you've ever been to an exhibition that has like 5 videos and you can hear the audio, they just bleed into each other. So there's limits to what you can do. But I thought, you know, just before closing time, they started playing this bell last night, and I thought it was an art piece. It was quite beautiful until the voice came on, saying you had 20 minutes left. I mean, I guess you could play, you know, sit there and play music for a month would be an interesting way to do it. I did one piece that ended up with an audio soundtrack. It was a comic book that dissolved itself, and it had some twinkling lights reflecting off of mylar that was moving around on a turntable, and an audio track that we'd done. But I think maybe headphones might be the best way to introduce it, just to keep the audio from bleeding into everything else. But, you know, for me, music is as much a relief from, I mean, I'm like the classical music world in my artwork. It's very old-fashioned, very labor-intensive and perfectionist. And since I haven't got much control over the instruments until I sit down to edit, and I never have time for that, you know, music is always on the improv end for me. So it's a release, but I don't get to do it very often. I had this dream of starting a noise music church, like a storefront church in Los Angeles. And I haven't yet figured it out, but I just watched a krautrock documentary on YouTube, and they showed this place in Berlin that was just kind of like the ground floor of a high-rise, it looked like, a coffee house, where I forget whether it was Neu or one of the bands in Berlin, basically sat there and did whatever they were going to do on and on and on over a time period. And that would be, for me, a great situation that I just haven't had the balls to get off the ground, or the excess cash.
So that's an unrealized project, this noise music.
Yeah, oh, there's a million of those, right?
Yeah. No, it's exciting. It ties in totally also with what Xenakis said once more, because he said, you know, there should be, he said in terms of art, there are things like a Rothko chapel, and why wouldn't such a thing exist for sound, no? Some kind of place where one could always visit. But you've got this other unrealized project I'm very fascinated by, which is your sort of project to do a prog rock opera. Can you tell us about this?
Well, I thought that made sense to do something I was completely unprepared for. And I'm still pretty unprepared for it. I'm still trying to work out, should the libretto be in English, for instance, because that always sounds terrible. And you know, what's the nature of the music? Is it going to lean in the direction of The Plan by the Osmond Brothers, which is a very sincere concept album about Mormonism? Or should it lean in the direction of Magma, where they created this whole sort of Zappa meets Wagner science fiction storyline with their own language and an aesthetic that doesn't exist anywhere else? I know that I'd like it to be melodic because I enjoy melody, even though as a noise musician, that's not a very important part of it. Although a lot of times we would improvise around something like Nature Boy. But more recently I've been using my voice rather than an instrument. I found out after a while that if I was playing sort of Fred Frith kind of stuff on guitar, and I couldn't, since I didn't know what the actual chords or notes were, I'd have to actually hear it to do anything with it. And in a group improvisational situation, I couldn't hear myself. So I kind of retreated from that. And I saw Captain Beefheart play once when they opened up the curtains and it was just the bass player playing this music, which is exactly what I had wanted to perform in my head. So I thought, well, someone else has done that. I don't have to try. And then being on stage was something I was very fearful of because of my inabilities as a real musician. And it's just weird to deal with real musicians or scientists. They have a great deal of disdain for what we artists do because we don't do real things.
And Rodney spoke about Wagner, and Ari also mentioned kind of Gesamtkunstwerk. And when we did the interview in LA, you told me about Wagner as well. You said that you were listening a lot when you thought about the libretto of Wagner and researched him because you thought it could be a good starting point. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And I'm curious if we can then open it up also, that sort of whole idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, because obviously that is a question if one thinks about bringing music into the world of art, and there are different notions of the Gesamtkunstwerk. I mean, the kind of early Wagner is a different Gesamtkunstwerk than the rather oppressive kind of late Wagner. So I was curious if you can tell.
Well, it all started, speaking of like LSD and things like that, it started going to these ayahuasca rituals where after the stuff was supposed to be wearing off, the audio soundtrack would be sort of new age Latin American music until it was time to start waking up. and they would play Beethoven followed by Wagner. And that was a sort of an introduction, but and thinking about I don't know how to pronounce it, the total music experience. There was also, Mike's Day Is Done was a version of the total music theatrical production experience, and I think that we were both kind of inspired by Catherine Sullivan's work, who is doing art based in theater conventions. I had wanted to do sort of these stage productions, like mini stage productions with proscenium arches, with something on the nature of born-again Christian Broadway musical kinds of wannabe things that they would do in the wake of Jesus Christ Superstar's popularity. And I never got very far on that because it meant actually having to write music down and get it played by people. But I thought with the prog rock opera that we could just improvise an awful lot of it and then just take the good stuff and loop it. Because that's what you can do with computers these days. The hard part would be actually performing the stuff, you know. But I thought that Mike's Judson Church performance is by far the best version of all of the Day Is Done music. So it is possible, but it takes a lot of energy and a lot more than improvisatory noise music does. That can be fun. It's not work the way rendering shit is.
Now, I really hope this opera will happen. It sounds exciting. Does anybody else want to say something about this?
Well, just what Jim was saying about headphones in the context of say, potential group show of Gesamtkunstwerks. I mean, where there's this crazy cacophony. I always find sound works in general that can be a problem in the context of a group show. I mean, it's very difficult. I remember, having a couple of experiences of some highly repetitive soundtrack like work, kind of interfering with my experience of another work. I find there's a problem with music in the context of an art
solo
exhibition in that way. I mean, that's why I kind of shy away from it. Especially if in a gallery, you can drive the people who are working there out of their mind.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I think it's like inconsiderate almost. For sure. I've been in situations where I've gone into galleries and why isn't this piece on? Oh, we forgot to turn it on, right? Because they have to listen to it all day long. So I find a problem with that. I mean, repetition and looping has been sort of part of my work, and I kind of like playing with it, but I have problems with it too, in that sense. But anyway, so headphones. I just did a piece recently. It was designed as a headphone mix of a piece that was a sound installation, but that's limiting as well. You don't want to have a bunch of people sitting around listening to headphones. That can be not very exciting.
But if you do it in a theater
social
situation or a night, that's...
I'm just thinking about the
gallery version.
Gallery context or museum context.
And what about the Gesamtkunstwerk? Because obviously that sort of whole idea, it came up in several of the conversations, and the whole idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk. Is that a notion you're interested in or you find problematic?
I kind of think of this Gesamtkunstwerk, I mean, it's really a way that you can approach making an exhibition. So it's really not about one piece or something. It's really about how you combine together, like it's more like a curatorial act, like how you bring together all different sorts of elements, like an exhibition. That's one work, of all the things. So, yeah, I don't know how that really works as a group exhibition, but I certainly consider making exhibitions of my own work in that kind of way. That includes, seeing maybe the backstage kind of side of things as well as, like the other side of the fourth wall, or, so that's kind of how you see around the edge of something. But, it's not just one work, it's the whole exhibition, including the people who are coming to see it.
Any other comments on the Gesamtkunstwerk?
Yeah, I was going to say what Angela just said, which is, I think, another aspect of the Gesamtkunstwerk is the inclusion of the audience, which goes back to the headphone thing, which I totally understand from a practical perspective. From a more, let's say, music perspective, I despise headphones. Like I really think headphones, because in fact it's a completely like isolating thing. So when you're listening, because if you're listening in a group, it's a performance. Like you're a group listening together to a thing, and you're interacting with a thing, and it's, as soon as you put on the headphones, it's just
flattens out space.
It's just a soundtrack, So it's very, but I completely understand I mean, that's why it's, I think for all of us in a way, a bit of an unrealized project. For me, it's a big unrealized, how do you exhibit music? I mean, it's a practical issue as well, but I really, like if I see headphones, I don't really put them on,
Well,
I have a headphone aversion.
You could exhibit one thing after another.
Exactly, I think, which is a legitimate, which goes back to Il Tempo.
That it's a sequence.
I mean, a sequence, I think that's a very legitimate.
Headphones can be fine at home by yourself. I kind of like that.
Yeah,
I've done a lot of ear damage though, because I just you crank them up and it's just like
another danger.
Then I once went to this like rave thing somewhere in England where everybody had headphones. Have you been to those? It's crazy.
Quiet parties.
Yeah, it's like 1,000 people just like,
Wow.
and you just hear like the sound of people jumping.
It's weird to dance without the actual throbbing bass.
Yeah. And everybody's just hearing something.
It's a good way to kind of deliver violence in music with the headphones.
Yeah.
Because you're just cancelling out the whole space element.
Yeah.
Now another possibility, obviously, how it can enter exhibitions, how music can enter exhibition is through scores. Many of you have been involved with scores. I've been looking this morning again at Rodney's songbook, which is a book only made out of scores, and Ari was mentioning over coffee his sort of collaboration on a score with Henri Sala, and at the same time when I spoke to Jim earlier on in LA, you were also mentioning a lot the sort of whole idea of sort of printed material in relation to sound records, of course, CDs by artists, records by artists. I mean, there's a whole Lionel Bovieri, the whole thing at Art Basel over many years, where records of artists are being shown. There's a whole history of records by artists. All of these are possibilities, scores and records. Angela has her own label. Rodney has done many, many records. Jim has done many. I mean, you've all done lots of different records. I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit about this, the importance of...
For me, the ultimate goal of that storefront church I never did was to have a weekly podcast of stuff that went on there. So to me, that's the internet, even though it's only a fifth of the information, maybe, if it's on an MP3, is an ideal dispersion. I have my sister and her husband are bluegrass musicians, amateurs, and they went to a folk festival in my hometown in their recently bought RV. I visited them there, and they were just playing bluegrass with other people in their RVs, and that's like a throwback to the era before recording began, and I seemed kind of interesting and cool to me. You could have noise music confabs like that, I guess. Everyone in their RVs show up with their little laptops and...
In an RV park, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
I think just in relation to records and labels and things, I think it's kind of funny that here, with this panel discussion, there's a kind of merch table that somebody's put together, but it's only got books. There's no music there. It's kind of I don't know. Maybe that's because it's been put together from an art point of view. I don't know.
book point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a funny paradox. But
See, that was our responsibility to bring our records, though,
Yeah.
or have our people do that.
Right.
Pretending not to care,
Yeah.
Well, I have some of my records at the Art Metropole booth.
Oh.
Go get them. Go get them.
And what about the scores? Because a lot in my sort of research in music, there's been a lot of conversations about scores, and besides Stockhausen and Xenakis, another kind of key conversation where we was to visit Boulez, and when we visit Pierre Boulez together with Philippe Pareno, he sort of said, that scars are never enough. I mean, kind of scars are never enough because we need the scars of scars, no?
The script.
Yeah, the script of the script, that kind of additional information. And obviously lots of artists who believe in improvisation reject scars altogether. And I was just, looking at Rodney's book of scars, I was wondering how you relate to scars.
Well, I made that the size of a portable desk too, so you could make notes on it like that. But no, I was more interested in the textual aspect of it. I wanted to make a songbook that's kind of like the Elton John songbook or whatever, whatever. And I kind of like the way the lyrics are. When you read lyrics in an old song, the way they're kind of stretched out to follow the music as a kind of different poetical.
Is it for piano?
Yeah, it's just a piano score. I mean, I don't read music anymore. I can't even remember how to do it. I had somebody do it from somebody in my band, actually, the keyboard player. I'm talking about keyboard players, and yeah,
Always the keyboard player.
Yeah, he's really good. But they play. Sometimes they play too much. So anyway, he did a fantastic job of kind of transcribing. But it was more like the way that I like the way the lyrics are kind of broken out along the following. It's just a different. So I was more interested in the kind of concrete poetry aspect of the way the lyrics trace the musical line in terms of the score, and just I wanted to do something people could, in an old-fashioned way, play them at home on their upright piano if they ever want. I don't know if anyone ever did, but it would be possible. That was my interest in that particular book. But a score, in terms of score, the idea of a score.
What about the others, about scars? Is there anything else we can add about scars?
I mean, I think it's a bit of a tricky proposition to display a score. I mean, it's something that comes up. I think it's a bit of a. I mean, I've been asked a few times about, and the problem is that a score is still something that really is like encoded. I mean, very few people can look at a score and look at it and go, oh yeah, okay, that's. So in fact, you're putting this thing on the wall that really. So in a way, it reduces it to something. So it takes away the actual what it is and replaces it with something sort of like decorative. And I find it a bit, and that's why, because you mentioned this score that I made with Henri, that was the goal, the thing that we said, because it was another request, would you show the score that you made for this film that we made together? And first I said no, because of this problem that I have about just sort of putting a score. But then we started thinking, but what if the score could actually be more than a score or show you something? And so in the end, we wound up making these scores that were printed on very long sheets of paper, like 20 meters long, one score, and then folding them up. And then I kind of made a thing of that the angle of the folds would have something to do with the tempo of the music. So in fact, then you have a situation where, the faster the music, the less space the score takes up in the room. And the slower the music, it opens up like this. So if you're actually following it along, you're also walking slower. So then it started getting interesting because someone could look at it and without knowing anything about music, could make a kind of, could know something about the music that you couldn't otherwise know. And I thought that was at least worth a try. But otherwise, I think it's always a bit difficult just to sort of, put a score sort of in a frame on a wall.
And Jim, Angela, and Ragnar, are scores important for you?
I've kind of produced scores, but only after the music is all made and done. Like not in the score to make the music, but then after the music is made, a recording of that then gets kind of processed and produces a score at the end of that through a kind of mechanical, or there's some software that actually will just spit out a kind of like doing a drawing of a sculpture after the sculpture is made, rather than doing a drawing to figure out how to make something that then turns into a sculpture, that kind of process. So I kind of like the flattening aspect of that, the sort of killing of time to just like take the music and make a score out of it, which is sort of like the wrong way round somehow, and has a kind of illegitimacy, like doing a drawing of a sculpture after you've made the sculpture and pretending that it's the thing that you were trying to plan to make it before you did the sculpture, kind of messing with the order of time.
Yeah, yeah, I always use scores when I'm doing projects. Either I'm working with old music where obviously you have score, and then I just find it a very easy process just to use, because I usually work with people who who are good musicians, and I'm not. So they use the score to understand what we're aiming for, and I just find the idea of a score always fascinating. That it's like the coolest thing ever. You know, people who read scores, just like. And I really like that. I heard the Beck just put out an album which was just a score.
Yeah, I just saw that. It's only the scores.
It's only the scores. I really like that. Just like it's like nowadays, like why bother making an album? You know, nobody's going to buy it anyway.
Jim, what about you?
And it can't be downloaded.
No, yeah.
So it's easily,
I used to work in special effects where you would use various forms of color and stuff to show if something was going to fade up or fade down, and I thought that was as close as I could get to scoring anything. But I had a friend from CalArts who had a player piano, and he was talking about doing his own rolls, and I thought, oh, there's something I could do. Before I'd heard of Conlon Nankaro, or what's his name, the Swiss composer who did a lot of similar things. I'd love to see some Conlon Nankaro piano roll laid out, because a lot of it's based on patterns and things. But I can relate to just looking at the graph on the computer where you're taking the chunks and looping them, putting them back and forth, and layering them that way. But I've forgotten how to read music since I quit playing viola in the 9th grade.
The ta ta ti ti ta.
I've got more questions, but before I ask my final question, I think it's a good moment to open it up to all of you. If there are questions for Angela, Rodney, Ragnar, Ari, Jim, that's the moment. We've got a question here, we've got a question here. If we might have the mic, we've got 3 questions already. 4, 5.
I have a question about the context of one collaborating with other artists, especially in this Gesamtkunstwerk, and how it relates to synesthetics, especially drug-induced synesthetics, and how that can be something that leads everyone kind of in the same direction, so that in a gallery space, you might have one continuous stream of music that the artists themselves created the work under that influence of that music, so that kind of influences where everyone's thinking in the same vein on a certain level.
This was very poetic.
It's hard to answer the question.
well, I mean, maybe just to give an example, I mean, he's not here, but since it's a good friend, someone I work with, Henri Salle, I mean, at the Serpentine show or at the Pompidou, I think he's someone who I know, and I've worked with him on this, has tried, when he does an entire show, to really have an audio that kind of leads you through the show. I mean, I don't know if that's sort of what but it's very much thought about, that it's not just, which is also another way of dealing with it. So it's not just that these different pieces are playing, but it's that an audio that's very carefully timed and processed, so that something begins and something takes over, and kind of, I know Philippe Pereno has worked that way as well. I mean, it's sort of a way also of planning an entire show, So which means it doesn't have to be one soundtrack, but you could make out of the different components, you could make, if you're sensitive to that, and you could make a kind of soundtrack. I mean, that's just some examples that come to mind. But
does anybody else want to comment on that? Or? Definitely has to do with that time code. Also, if I understand the question, this idea that the show is a time code, is that what you mean? It's a kind of a time code.
Yes. Yes.
It's kind of, more narrative than sculptural. Yeah.
It can be. It can be. Yeah. I think so.
When I work with musicians to achieve an end thing, I mean, it's really, I always kind of think that the overlap between something that's visual and something that evolves in time, like the music, together with something that, like an installation or something. But it's always really a good way to make a kind of synergetic thing. And the better way is to really just to think about the structure, like, and not the visual aspects or the sound, but both thinking about the structure in that kind of way. That's the way to kind of achieve the better kind of synergy between different elements coming together, is not by thinking about those separate things, but by thinking about the commonality, the structure.
Maybe we can move on. We had a question here. Can we have the microphone, please?
This is a question for you. What's stopping you from doing the noise church?
Zoning regulations and what the other churches in the neighborhood would think of it. Because where I can afford to rent there's about 5 churches near my studio. I don't know. I need enough money to have a dedicated facility for that, basically.
Religious freedom.
That's the basic thing, and not just my work involves so much rendering that I'm just sort of addicted to sitting there and getting anything else done is always on the periphery because there's always some deadline.
We had a question here, I think, in the front row, and here as well.
It's just an interesting coincidence that here in Miami we have a place called Church Hills, and there's an international noise conference every other week, it seems, and we have Nights of the Weirds, and you should come to Miami and participate in one of these events.
Okay.
And I just wanted to ask one of these simple questions for each of you. If you can spend an afternoon with a musician, here, living or not, who would you want to spend the afternoon with?
Me?
Well, each of you, if you can just go down the line and tell me, who would you like to spend, have an afternoon, sort of thrift shopping and having coffee with?
I don't know, King Pleasure. Sun Ra.
Bach. Eric Satie. I think that would be very entertaining. Coffee with Eric Satie.
Wow. Bob. Yeah.
That was okay. I was going to say Bob Dylan too. He's hard to get to though.
Yeah.
So. What? Whoa.
Oh. He has a number of art studios.
Let's hang.
He has a number of art studios around, like in Malibu and
Malibu,
places.
yeah, I understand. So you've probably hung out with him quite a bit then.
No, but one of my former employees was hanging out with his son, and he said, "Oh, you should use my father's studio." So I guess you get to him through his children.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Angela?
I'd like to spend an afternoon with John Cage. I actually did it once, but and he's just so funny that I would say Cage.
And for me, it's Ligeti, and it almost happened because I was really obsessed by Ligeti, and I spoke to his office kind of every month. And each time they said he was busy, but at a certain moment, I kind of then got through to him. And he explained to me, and it was just such an unbeatable argument, so I couldn't insist anymore. Because he said he was in his 70s, and he said he had at least another 30 years of music to write, and he just didn't have any time to do anything else. So it remained an unrealized project. Yeah. Next question. Yeah, got a question here.
Hello, my name is Joel Garten. I'm a pianist, improviser, and composer. And I've been improvising for more than 20 years. My music is very influenced by visual art, especially by artists like Giorgio Morandi, because while it's improvisation, it's of the moment, it also has concepts that I repeat, over many, 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 many years. just like Brandy used little ceramic elements over decades, I use these same musical concepts over many years. I'm interested in showing my work as art, performing my music in galleries and museums, and I'm interested if any of you have any input about that.
Have any what?
Yeah, how to...
I'm sorry?
Input, did you say? Sorry, is that what you said?
Yeah, well, how can I go about, I mean, I'm in the music world now, I perform quite a bit, but I'm interested in making a segue to performing music as art, and in museums and in galleries, and I'm wondering if, if you have any ideas about that.
Just, you know how to do it.
I'm not a good person to answer that because when I was doing music kind of as a hobby when I was younger, and then I became an artist, and I really just had to, I just put it aside for a long time, and then I just reintegrated it. So it was a long, slow process for me. I really wouldn't know what to say. If you consider it to be art, then, I mean, actually, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. I can't answer.
Isn't it also just like always the good old strong statement of like, it's art?
Yeah, but you like to...
Put it on YouTube and with cute cats or something.
Yeah.
Get a good audience following it.
You can get a bigger audience on YouTube, that's for damn sure.
Are you playing a lot of concerts now, or concerts and records and? Right. Yeah. I mean, one thing would be it's slightly radical, but I mean, is that you maybe at some point, if you really feel that way, like strongly about it, because a concert will always be a concert, and it's always received that way. It's a concert. He's going to play the next. So I would say, like, I reached a point where I stopped giving concerts because I wasn't interested anymore, because in the music world, I think maybe Ragnar said it. It's totally true. You play concerts and you make records. You make records, you play concerts. I mean, it's about all you can do in the music. So one way is just to insist on it, don't make records, don't make concerts. And then when you play somewhere, even if it's either a gallery, but even if it's not a gallery, maybe it's just a space, but it's not a concert, I mean, and that could already start something that maybe is more satisfying for you artistically than, because I also had a similar doubt at some point where I just thought, why am I, concerts, records, concerts, records, and to break out of that is not necessarily so easy, but it can lead to a very interesting place. So one thing would be to say, okay, stop the concerts and figure out really how you want to present what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, I know pianists who perform new music, and they may have a 30-year career, and they show up and they, often play concerts for 10 people. While, artists who, have worked for 5 years are selling works for hundreds of thousands of dollars and great acclaim. So there's a real mismatch between the art world and the music world, and there really shouldn't be.
I think it's interesting that you spoke about Giorgio Morandi, the painter. What I think about your question and those paintings, to me, they are paintings of objects in a space, but it's really not just about the objects that they describe, the painting, but it's also about the spaces between the object, and that's the thing that becomes kind of electrified in a way by those paintings. It makes the whole surface like this kind of protein surface about the distribution of space and the difference between this object and that, and the space between this one and that. And so it's kind of like making the painted surface a description of the objects on the table in front of you. Like that's kind of, it's actually inside the painting. Like the problem, like you're talking about making improvised concerts, and if, like Ari said, like you can just choose not to do it, but actually when you're in the concert and doing it, that is it. You know, that is the thing. So it's about that temporality, that moment. In the same kind of way that in a Morandi painting, it's not the object that is painted, it's not the space between the objects, you know, it's the painting, it's the surface, you know, that is it, you know.
Yeah, I find it kind of fascinating also what you say, like that music is not anymore a moment.
Yeah.
You know, music used to be a moment, but now with technology, like music is like totally music is objective, or it's an object, you know, it's like constantly in people's ear, and it's not a moment anymore.
It's an evolution.
Yeah.
Lamont Young kind of worked out. Didn't he have a patron who just paid for him to continue on? That's the closest thing I can think of as an economic relationship between experimental music and money.
Well,
Or just move to a socialist country.
I live in a socialist.
Before they
that's
ceased
super
to
interesting.
exist.
Lamont Young found the patron whom Xenakis and didn't find to
Yeah.
make that house happen. Yeah, exactly.
Socialist countries like
That's very interesting.
freely improvise music.
So we've got 5 minutes, so we can take one or two more questions. The question here and the question here. So we should take those two questions.
I was interested in getting your input on copyright and authorship, and have you ever gotten into any trouble with any of your collaborators over the final authorship? Because, you know, as an artist, one generally has overarching creative, free range, and you work with these coordinates also, but sometimes stress may arise, and I was interested in hearing your thoughts about that authorship relationship, copyright, and the legal aspect of what you are doing with this music.
When you're working with dead composers, they don't get to sue you, but, I don't know.
The kids can.
Well, they're long time dead, most of these scores you're working with.
But is your question about working with music, or is it more about collaboration? And
In the visual art, sometimes I work with another artist or I work with another curator, and there's usually a kind of, we talk about those borders and kind of map out exactly what we are contributing.
Some of Lamont Young's collaborators were kind of angry that he took credit for all the compositions that were improvised.
Yeah.
Dream theater stuff, yeah. But talking about it is already probably a very good step, no?
How do you are all big artists, and your names are out there, and you're being sold, and you're being represented, and you work with these other people who perhaps may have the same profile or not. How do you go about establishing who is the creator and who, that relationship is very abstract. And when you are, working with an institution or you have attention from the press, sometimes you say something that may irritate another. And I was wondering if you've ever had that happen, or if the drama that usually accompanies, a lot of these collaborative efforts that are not mapped out has popped up in your career or in your trajectory.
I've heard of people thinking that they did something because they did something similar to something that, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's sort of a magical thinking that, oh, well, I was going to do that, and this other person did that.
But it has to be like some kind of it's just all about trust, I think. Just you collaborate with people, and it just has to be trust, like that everything is credited in the right way.
Yeah, credit.
Yeah.
It's all about agreeing what the credits are when you release something. Yeah.
I was going to do
and about money,
Yeah,
I ran into
if there is.
I was going to do a piece a few years ago where I was going to make a reversed piano, left to right, grand piano. And I went to the Bosendorfer factory and I walked through, and we were going to have it all. I wanted to have everything reversed, like left to right, screws and everything. And I worked out a deal with them and through my gallery. And then I found out this, and I can't think of the name of the artist. Somebody said, somebody did that as a conceptual work. You know, like,
Evan Holloway?
I don't know who it was. It was an LA
He
artist.
didn't. Yeah, he didn't actually make the
I know,
piano.
I know.
But
I was gonna, but then they told me about this piece, and I thought, oh my God, I mean, I wanted to make it as an object that would have this uncanny reversal thing. And I thought, well, a conceptual artist already thought, I mean, it's such an obvious idea, I should have thought, somebody would have thought of that. And he did, I think he did it, and he realized the piece as if, you know.
Yeah,
but I was gonna,
looking.
and then I thought, well, I just basically can't do it anymore, so I didn't. So I had to forfeit my deposit, and either that or I could have contacted the artist and say, I wondered, but what would be the point? And I was going, damn, that's why I got out of conceptual art. I wanted to get into sculpture, and it's like, that's a great thing about conceptual art on one hand, but yeah, anyway, I didn't do it for that reason. I didn't want to engage in that problem. If somebody, I don't know what it's like, I suppose I could have asked him as a collaboration. You know the name of the artist?
Evan Holloway was he put out a CD of Chopin played on the reverse piano.
Right, yeah. It was so stupid that I didn't do my research.
There's some pieces of his out there.
Yeah. Anyway.
So we can take one last question. That's a question here.
Thank you. I was just a little surprised about how compartmentalized at least the discussion today was about making visual art and making music. That there wasn't this Gesamtkunstwerk about in its creation. I mean, I think Rodney and Angelise both spoke about making music, but then pushing aside the idea that you then make a soundtrack to it. And I think that's a completely legitimate idea and a great sort of next level. You could take it, an idea that you're expressing through art into another medium. And I've just, is anybody really trying that? And especially those of you that are, Jim, and also a visual artist, whereby like trying to create a work that you could experience on a multiple level, and not necessarily in a performance context.
Yeah, especially like I think it's about making an exhibition often. That's what I think. I don't think of it as separate music or separate, visual or sculpture or. But I kind of think that a lot of works happen like that when really making an exhibition, because there are so many elements that go somehow together or work against each other, or that have to actually somehow hang around the same idea. So, but in different forms or ways. I'm also working with architecture and the space and the people people's expectations about what they come to see as well. So that's, I do think about that. Yeah.
Does anybody else want to answer to that? Or?
I'd like to, but I haven't got the time. Both things take a lot of time, and it's hard to find. It's like Ligeti. 30 years of composing to do.
If you're like doing a retrospective of your work, then what a great time to sort of create another level to it by adding music to it.
Yeah, if I could clone myself, sure.
I guess I'm the same. This time factor. I just found when I'm doing music, it's quite absorbing, and I have kind of compartmentalized it in that sense. And when I'm doing art, like I don't listen to music when I'm doing my work. For example, it's not part of my. I kind of almost resent the constant intrusion of music in public places, whatever. So I tend to like silence in my studio. I don't. And when I do music, even when I listen to music, it's kind of a special thing. I put a record on and listen to it. I like, So I find, anyway, I don't know quite what I'm saying, but they've become kind of separate activities for me.
I mean, another way to deal with this compartmentalizing, sorry. There's another, so you have this Gesamtkunstwerk thing, but I think there's also, on the opposite side, it could just be a kind of shift or something simple. I mean, if you just say, for instance, music is art, then the whole thing goes, like you can also have Gesamtkunstwerk in the sense of it is enough in and of itself. It's a whole universe, if you're just willing to kind of make that shift. It's a little shift, but then it also becomes enough, and then you don't have these compartments of, is it a soundtrack to this, and is it, that's another way. I mean, that's something I think about.
Yeah, it's like we're talking about Cage a lot. That that he is like the essence of the Gesamtkunstwerk. They're creating something really small, that just like
it's a universe. Yeah.
There's a total universe.
Yeah.
Everything like kind of goes into that gesture. Yeah.
Exactly.
There could not be a more wonderful conclusion. I do, however, have one very last question. We found on the internet a list of Jim of 10 songs that saved your life. It's addressed to Guillaume. It must have been some kind of online thing. And it starts with Prokofiev and goes then to Uta Lemper and Velvet Underground and many other things. So I just wanted to ask Jim first to tell us about the songs that saved your life, and maybe all of you as well to tell us about the song that saved your life.
Well, I can't work without music on, and some of those are things I sing along to. And I should have said I would have liked to walked around with Scott Walker, whose new album is out, and it's pretty amazing. It's just a series of things. They asked, and I thought I should just react honestly and emotionally, because these are things that affected me emotionally.
Ali?
Not a song, but two experiences that I had at roughly the same time. One was going to the movie theater and seeing Stop Making Sense, Talking Heads, at the movie theater. And in the movie theater, everyone dancing. It was like a concert. I mean, I didn't really know the Talking Heads that well. I mean, I think I was 13 or something. I'd go, and that was an amazing, just about the movie, the music, the band, the way the way the concert was completely, what happened at the cinema, and people were selling T-shirts, but it was a movie. That was one, and the other was my father took me to see, of course not the original, but it was a Brooklyn Academy of Music, Einstein on the Beach, actually. And that really, because until that time I'd been playing, I was playing piano, classical music, and then I went to see this, and it was like, what is this? Because people had said it's classical music. Oh, he's a classical Philip Glass, it's a classical composer. But I'd never in my life heard, and it was loud, and that was classical music. I think really changed my life. That production, yeah, definitely.
Ragnar?
Yeah, I could say, like, yeah, Bob again. Like all the tired horses in the sun. How am I gonna get any writing done? It's like when I heard that song first, I kind of discovered that I could become this is art, this is not music. That it really changed my life. But then I mean, yeah, it's just songs are so essential to me. Like I have a crazy obsession with a song. Like the song that is now saving my life is Bing Crosby singing "Stranger in Paradise." It's just I'm always listening to it. Like, yeah.
Rodney?
Oh, I guess for me it would be Rubber Soul by the Beatles album. It was a kind of generally considered to be one of the first kind of coherent album, experiences in pop music. And I kind of, when I was about 14 when it came out, I was kind of into jazz before that, and it kind of turned me into more of a was kind of snobby about pop music, and really until I heard that, and then I became, it kind of galvanized my interest in pop music.
Angela?
Gosh, that's a kind of question that could kill me, actually. It makes me squirm to think I have to choose something, and I can. But then, well, I kind of think of two. I think I like to listen to anything that Neil Young does, because it just makes me feel happy for some reason. I don't know, it reminds me of a certain time of my life that I was very happy, and I listened to a lot of Neil Young. So that really goes together very well. But also the Beach Boys too, because I like these harmonies that they have. It just makes me happy to hear those two things.
Yeah, I
So
almost said that sounds.
Yeah.
It's actually wonderful to conclude on that, and I would like to thank Angela, Rodney, Ragnar, Ari, and Jim so very, very much. I'd like to thank Marc Spiegler, Annette Schönholzer, Claudio Vogt, Michael Kruse, and of course all of you for being here. Thanks a lot. Thank you.